Hi everyone, and thank you for watching this second video on culturally responsive teaching. In this video, we're going to be focusing on simultaneously supporting and challenging multilingual learners. Thank you for your bravery and courage as we learn together. Now, a great warm-up is to go to this URL and differentiate between different aspects of culture. What do you think would be considered surface culture, shallow culture, and deep culture? Take a second if you'd like to, go to the video link and try sorting these out. Now, culture in terms of the context that we're talking about with culturally responsive teaching, culture is a system of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that the members of society use to interact with their world and with one another. And so culture is very much so like an iceberg. The part of the iceberg that we see is just like the part of culture that we see, surface level culture. And these have low emotional impacts. These are things like food, clothing, and language. And unfortunately, when we try to focus on culture for those in groups that are not part of that culture, those are the things we focus on. And so for me, growing up, when I learned about other cultures, I learned about all these surface level artifacts, which didn't help me truly understand those populations. Then a little bit deeper, we have shallow culture, which has high emotional impacts on those individuals, especially when those cultural elements are threatened. Those are things like concepts of time and nonverbal communication. And lastly, there's deep cultural elements that have intense emotional impacts when they're threatened. Those are things like ideas of fairness and justice, expectations related to gender roles, individualism and collectivism. And so as an educational environment, when we are trying to illuminate other cultures, we have to make sure we're doing all of these different levels of culture so that we can truly understand those various individuals, and also understanding that there's so many intercultural variations between a broad culture. And this brings us to why culturally responsive teaching matters. Now, all of this information is going to be coming from Schneider and Fenner's 2021 text, Culturally Responsive Teaching Tools for Equity. I would highly suggest picking up the book. It is extremely valuable and has a wealth of information for teachers who want to make their classrooms more equitable. Now, Schneider and Fenner define multilingual learners as students whose parents or guardians are support speaking one language other than English at home. Now, those could be bilingual students, multilingual students, heritage language students. According to the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research, the term multilingual learners refers to all children or youth who are or have been consistently exposed to multiple languages. So it includes students that would be identified as English language learners, dual language learners, heritage language learners, and students who speak varieties of English or indigenous languages. You could have multilingual learners in your classroom that aren't designated as ELL and are fairly proficient in English because, again, they're exposed to multiple languages at home. And it's important to note this connection to culturally responsive teaching because we can move in and out of various cultural groups that we are a part of. I grew up in New Jersey and had a lot of cultural influences from that area. But when I did my undergraduate degree in Nashville, Tennessee, I was exposed to a very different American culture. And so I changed some of my cultural norms, some of my shallow surface and deep cultural artifacts, which meant I was switching between groups. And we're doing this for a few reasons. First, there's an increasing number of microaggressions and school bullying instances that have been reported to multilingual learners in recent years. The idea of celebrating cultural diversity really doesn't get to the hard work of educators advocating for, serving as allies, and relentlessly striving for equity for multilingual learners. The other idea is that really no amount of cultural knowledge can prepare us sufficiently to recognize and respond justly to the insidious and often implicit and intersectional inequities experienced by many students. That's why we have to be culturally responsive, not just celebrate diversity. And lastly, as educators, we are urged that we need to distinguish between cultural initiatives that are very surface level and cultural equity initiatives that would truly create a safe space for all of our students. So when we're talking about how to support and challenge multilingual learners, what does that actually look like? Well, there are a few look-fors that we would be able to say. First, we would see that multilingual learners are taught grade level contexts and texts. Instructional texts would include a balance of grade level texts and texts at students' reading and language levels. Multilingual learners should be provided clear visual and oral instructions for activities, and all new activities should be modeled by the classroom teacher. Instruction and materials should be appropriately scaffolded so multilingual learners are able to access and engage with grade level content and texts. In the classroom, there should be visual supports for multilingual learners like word walls with visual and/or home language translation. Instruction should include regular structured small group work and pair work. Instruction should include activities that foster critical thinking and reflection, like open-ended discussion prompts and students' monitoring of their own learning. Instruction should include interdisciplinary and project-based learning. Instruction should also include activities that require students to make connections with their prior learning. Instruction should also include activities that require students to consider alternative ways of understanding information and push students to challenge the status quo. For example, analyzing the change that some states have made from celebrating Columbus Day to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And lastly, what we would see is that multilingual learners have access to and the support needed to be successful in gifted, honors, and/or college preparatory classes. So in this brief video, we're going to be talking about 3 ways to support and challenge multilingual learners. One of those ways we're going to talk about is building an academic mindset. And there are 4 different characteristics of an academic mindset. We want to think, I belong here, that I'm welcome and part of this community, that I can succeed at this, that when I hit a sticky situation, when I struggle academically, good, that means I'm going to learn and I can be successful. We should also have a mindset which says that my ability and my competence with anything I do grows with my effort. So there should be a correlation between how much effort I put in and how much I am learning and growing. And lastly, there should be an idea that this work has value to me. A second way that we can support and challenge multilingual learners is through interdisciplinary and project-based learning units, which we'll talk about. And the third thing that we can do to support and challenge multilingual learners is to scaffold instruction. So out of those 3 things we're going to be focusing on today, let's first talk about how to build an academic mindset and a few strategies that we can use. As teachers, we can model what it means to have an academic mindset by describing our own challenges and how we work to overcome them. We can acknowledge that challenge and failure are both a normal and temporary part of the learning process. We can also set up procedures where students can model their problem-solving strategies and academic mindsets for other students. Another strategy is to explicitly identify and describe the academic mindsets that we are working on to help students cultivate and explain why they are important. And we can provide models for academic mindsets through different books and stories that we share. For example, and I have the book in the picture here if you'd like to check it out on Amazon. In the book, The Most Magnificent Thing by Ashley Spires, the main character perseveres through multiple failed attempts to build a device that she has imagined. Another way we can help build an academic mindset is to ask students to reflect on their academic mindset. We can use academic mindset exit tickets, goal-based journaling, and success folders. And those are 3 ways to help students think about their learning and to see themselves as learners. For example, as part of an exit ticket or a journal prompt, you might ask students to reflect on something that was challenging about the day's lesson and one strategy that they used to meet that challenge. Other items you might include on exit ticket or as a journal prompt are asking students to explain a way in which they thought like a learner, to explain a new academic term they learned, to write the steps they took to make today successful, or to describe something they were most proud of related to their learning. Success folders, in terms of definitions, are compilations of student work. So for example, every week or every 2 weeks, you can return student work and ask your students to select a piece of work that they are most proud of or that they worked really hard to complete. You can have students write a short explanation of why they included a particular piece of work on an index card that you attach to that piece of work. Now, please note when you're setting up this procedure, be sure to model the process for students and talk about what work they might want to use as an example. And these are, again, a great resource for parents and students, especially within guardian conferences and student goal-setting meetings. You can also have students decorate their folders with inspirational quotes or images that represent success for them. One more way that I'm going to be talking about to build an academic mindset is to foster students' academic language use. Academic language is the specialized, often decontextualized language that is needed to engage with the school curriculum and academic learning tasks. So one way that we can support students in using academic language is by explicitly teaching language functions for different academic tasks that students are expected to engage in, such as agreeing and disagreeing, asking for clarification, providing evidence, and adding on. We can also do this by exploring language registers. So we can support students in recognizing how language changes across settings and with different people. You could even expand the discussion of registers to explore how students might communicate differently based on cultural expectations. For example, and you see some on the bottom of the slide here, how might a student communicate differently with their grandmother than with a classmate when talking about the same topic? In terms of how we can challenge our multilingual learners, the main way we can do that while creating a safe and equitable learning environment is by using interdisciplinary and project-based learning units. These types of units benefit multilingual learners because they do a few things. First, they offer opportunities for oral language practice through collaborative work. They offer authentic learning experiences framed around a common theme. They provide opportunities to practice language in context across content areas. They also support the development of higher order thinking skills and provide an opportunity for educators to collaborate in support of multilingual learners, language development, and content learning. Take a moment and look at this chart. This differentiates between what is an interdisciplinary unit and what is a project-based learning unit. Also, how do those two intersect? This would also be a good time to think about the particular interdisciplinary and project-based learning units that you use in your classroom and how they might be tweaked in order to better meet the need of multilingual learners. Next, let's look at some different strategies on how we can scaffold instruction to best challenge and support our multilingual learners. Because of the support that they can provide, scaffolds can help make rigorous grade level curriculum accessible to all students by providing comprehensive input. So academic texts and concepts can be broken down into meaningful pieces and be presented with key instructional supports in order to strengthen multilingual learners' understanding of and engagement with this content. For example, if multilingual learners are engaging with a chunk of grade level text, they may benefit from such scaffolds as the use of graphic organizers, bilingual or English glossaries of key vocabulary, scaffolded text-dependent questions to help them get at the key ideas of the text, pair or small group work, and supporting materials in their home language if they are literate in it. Other materials and resources include graphic organizers, visuals, manipulatives, word banks or word walls, sentence stems, sentence frames or paragraph frames, adapted texts and or audio text, English and or bilingual glossaries, and supporting materials in home languages. There are other choices that we can make as educators to help support scaffolded instruction as an educator. So we can repeat and paraphrase language when we're in a discussion. We can provide interactive modeling. We can pre-teach vocabulary and academic language structures to our students. We can consider instruction of background knowledge and what students may need to know to really delve into content. We can practice academic skills and language with a non-academic topic that all students would have access to. We can reinforce concepts and skills with multiple modalities. And lastly, we can implement routines to support reading and writing. And the wonderful thing about all of these choices is that it helps all of our students, not just our multilingual learners. Let's look at some more specific strategies now. So one strategy we can use is modeling and think-alouds. Modeling, an essential scaffold for multilingual learners, involves the teacher or another student demonstrating a new concept or approach to learning, and the students learn by observing. A strategy for engaging students during the modeling process is to ask students what they notice during the modeling. So here are a few steps in planning for, let's say, a think aloud related to text analysis. So we can identify juicy stopping points. So to prepare for a think aloud, we can use sticky notes to identify places in a text where we can make inferences, synthesize information, ask a question, or consider the author's purpose. We can also identify areas that might cause confusion to students. We can also determine where and when to think aloud. So we could narrow down our think alouds to maybe 5 or 7 stops per text. In identifying where to stop, we should consider our objectives for the lesson, what strategies we have or haven't covered with students, and why the text was selected. And then finally, we can write a script on sticky notes using the first person. So a great example would be, I'm a little confused about what is happening at this point. I think perhaps the author is using a flashback to provide background information to the reader. I'm going to keep reading. So these modelings and think alouds show students how to engage with that content and give them, as I like to tell my students, a tool in their toolbox that they can use in other situations and contexts as well. Something else that we can do is practice academic skills and language with familiar content. So practicing academic language and skills with familiar content is an excellent strategy to introduce students to new academic skills and the language they need for those academic skills. So here's an example. If you're going to have students compare and contrast the viewpoints of 2 characters from a text you are reading, you might have them first compare and contrast their opinions on a familiar topic. For example, the best summer activity with the opinions of a peer. So then what teachers can do is we can begin with the language students use during this initial discussion to create some responsive frames like sentence, stems, or frames. Then teachers can teach new sentence structures that students can try out. For example, in working on comparison, you might introduce and have students practice new words or phrases such as whereas, on the one hand, and on the other hand. The figures below that I have on the bottom of this slide provide a model of a graphic organizer and sentence frames that you can use to introduce and practice language of comparison. A third strategy that we can use is to reinforce concepts and skills with multiple modalities. So the use of multimodal learning opportunities can foster student engagement and appeal to learners' varied learning preferences. A few things that we can do for this is the barometer and argument balance scale. So let's talk a little bit more about the barometer. So for this activity, I would suggest placing signs labeled strongly agree and strongly disagree at opposite ends of the room, or put 2 contrasting statements at either end. Then ask a compelling question that can be answered with a yes or a no response. For example, a compelling question should be, should schools have dress codes? Give students time to consider the question and develop their opinion. Next, ask students to position themselves in the room based on their response. This activity could be used as an introduction to a topic, serve as a formative assessment, or be used at the end of a unit. You could also assign students roles and have them respond to the question with their new role. In terms of the argument balance scale, for this activity, students would create either a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional scale that they have to use to evaluate an argument. The issue of what that is placed at the center of the scale. So you can see an example here just of a 2D model and a 3D model that students are using as well. For example, if students are debating the benefits and risks of space exploration, the term space exploration would go at the center. Students would then work in pairs to list supporting evidence for both sides of the argument. Students are asked to consider the strength of each argument that they provide. For example, a pair might decide that one piece of evidence is weaker than another, so they could use a smaller sided card for that argument or tear off the corner of the card to indicate weaker evidence. So it allows them to look at an issue from multiple perspectives and then identify that the evidence can be more weighty or less weighty depending on the credibility of that evidence. Now, again, if you were in the workshop, we would do a feedback carousel. We talk about those things that are already doing in our class and sharing other resources. I would also direct you to a few files in our Google Drive with book lists and resources that you can use in your classes. But In this case, because this is a video, let's skip right to some steps that you can take if you're saying, you know what, Scott, yes, I want to make sure that I'm challenging and supporting my multilingual students. The first thing we can do is make sure that we're providing access for all of our multilingual learners. So if you wish to focus on your access in your classroom, you can set a goal specific to making the grade level content more accessible to all students. For example, you might set a goal to strengthen your teaching of academic language to multilingual learners in your content area, or to implement routines that support greater access to grade level text. And I have a little organizer down there where you can say, here's the equity issue I want to focus on, and here is why that's important to my students. A second step we can do is use a scaffolded lesson planning checklist to help make sure that we are creating scaffolded lessons that can meet the needs of all of our multilingual learners and really all of our students. If you'd like a copy of that, you can email me and I'm happy to share that with you. The third step that we can take is to provide challenge for our multilingual learners. So as you look for opportunities to challenge multilingual learners, consider adding maybe an interdisciplinary, project-based learning, or social justice theme unit to your teaching repertoire. If possible, think about how you might collaborate with colleagues to develop and implement this unit. If you're an administrator, you can brainstorm how you might be able to showcase the work of educators who are already incorporating interdisciplinary, project-based learning or social justice themed lessons into their teaching. So those are three things that we can immediately do to make sure that we're supporting and challenging our multilingual learners. In terms of a closure to the end of this video, here are a few questions that you can ask. What was the most significant takeaway from this chapter or this workshop in terms of simultaneously supporting and challenging multilingual learners? And what steps do you think you're going to take to more effectively support them in terms of learning in your context? If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to start a dialogue with you as we are all working to support all of our students. And I would highly suggest picking up Schneider and Fenner's text, Culturally Responsive Teaching Tools for Equity. It is an incredible text with a wealth of resources, ideas, and learning strategies that we can use to support all of our students, especially our multilingual learners. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.